So welcome everybody. It is great to see so many faces here. And we're really looking forward to this discussion today. And the topic is how the blue economy can help solve the climate crisis. And it is in honor of the Center for the Blue Economy's 10-year anniversary. So just to indulge me for a minute here with a little background on the center. We started the center a decade ago, and we had a few goals in mind. We wanted to educate the next generation of ocean and coastal policy leaders. We wanted to use cutting-edge economic analysis to help demonstrate the ocean's key role in promoting ecological health and human flourishing. And we wanted to make sure government policy promotes the right mix of incentives and investments for a robust blue economy in the 21st century that is an active component of climate solutions. So I'm very thankful for this decade of hard work from our incredible staff, including, of course, Rachel here, the outstanding contributions from many of our global partners, and the incredible generosity of our donors. And through all of that work, we have achieved all of our objectives. So we have educated dozens of ocean and coastal resource management professionals who are now leaders in the field across the country and the world in a wide range of organizations. Our research continues to revolutionize how ocean economics is measured and used by governments and businesses around the world. And something I've really taken on over the last 2 years, which is developing this Ocean Climate Action Plan, which is largely the focus of today's discussion. I'm happy to report that it has played a key role in setting the agenda for the Biden administration's ocean policy goals. So it's been very gratifying to see our work represented at the highest levels. And so today's discussion is really the perfect encapsulation of our first decade. It's going to be moderated by our research director, Charlie Colgan, and it's on this topic of ocean climate action that we have focused so much on through the center's work. So let me get right to it now and introduce the panelists. Our first is going to be Nico de Golia. He is an alum of our program, and he is the Director of Global Sustainability and Corporate Citizenship at Crowley Maritime Corporation. So he is, leading sustainability efforts for one of the biggest shipping companies in the country. Dr. Michael Graham, Professor of Marine Ecology at Moss Landing Marine Labs, and also the founder and owner of Monterey Bay Seaweeds, who's really doing cutting-edge research on aquaculture. Then we have Alyssa Mann, Project Director for Disaster Resilience at the Nature Conservancy. We've worked with the Nature Conservancy over many years and many projects and love their work. And she's going to tell us a lot about what they're doing on kind of, the coastal side of infrastructure, living shorelines, et cetera. Then we have Dr. Habib Dagher. He is the Executive Director of the Advanced Structures and Composites Center at the University of Maine. And he's going to talk about, the offshore wind industry that's about to really take off in the US. And then last but not least, we have Jason Giffen, another alum of the Institute. He is Vice President of Planning, Environment, and Government Relations at the Port of San Diego, where they're doing just outstanding cutting-edge blue economy work. So each panelist is going to provide a very brief presentation, and then we'll get to a moderated discussion to round out the hour led by Dr. Colgan. So again, thank you all so much for coming. We hope you learned something. And now I'll pass it off to Nico.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Jason, and happy 10-year anniversary to the Center for the Blue Economy. Congratulations for all the work you guys are doing. I think Rachel's going to go ahead and share the slides here for me momentarily. But first of all, thank you to everybody who's taken the time out of their day to join us on this really important topic. The purpose of my conversation or talk is to really share, who we are at Crowley, what we do, and what is the role of the shipping industry in terms of decarbonizing our overall economy. So if we can skip to the next slide, please. Thank you. So who is Crowley? So Crowley is a company that you may never have heard of, and yet I'm certain that you've interacted with our operations over the course of your life. We're the largest U.S. maritime or Jones Act company. That's a company that operates vessels built in America, registered or flagged with the U.S. flag and crewed by Americans. We operate a fleet of about 200 or so vessels over our 4 different business units in logistics, shipping, government solutions working with the Department of Defense, and fuels. We have a footprint on both coasts, including, I guess, the Gulf of Mexico, so the 3 coasts of the United States, as well as a large footprint in Alaska. And some of the services that you might be familiar with are tugs that you see here in San Francisco Bay on the left-hand side. We also were the original owners of the red and white fleet. That's no longer a Crowley company as of just a couple years ago. But if you got on one of those vessels to a tour of Alcatraz or to go under the Golden Gate, you were riding on a Crowley ship. So I want to just highlight this to say that we're a very diversified company with over 129 years of experience innovating in the maritime and logistics space, starting out with a human-powered rowboat 129 years ago. And today we're operating some of the most cutting-edge technology that I'll talk about to make our fleets more efficient. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So why are we as a maritime company focused on innovation and sustainability? Maritime companies you might think of as being over the horizon, maybe not the most innovative, maybe not the most focused on environmental stewardship, but that is changing. Globally, our industry is responsible for about 3% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And logistics, if you include our overland assets and warehouses and things like that, makes up about 11% of all of the GHGs. But it's not just on climate where we face a large footprint and where we need to do better. We're also one of the least diverse sectors in the world in terms of both gender identities and racial identity. And so as an industry, it has come time for us to really do better. And I'm excited to say that Crowley Maritime is really leading the way here. Next slide, please. So again, what's the business case? We are a private corporation, right? We have to tie it back to the business case. So we know, based on a study that was conducted last year from Yale School of the Environment and in partnership with an NGO, that 74% of Americans are willing to spend more money and prioritize shopping with companies and organizations that can demonstrate that they leverage cleaner shipping methods than their competitors. And so we're getting a lot of pressure from our customer base to do what we do better. Over the past 6 months alone, over $100 million worth of our customers have requested sustainability performance data related to greenhouse gases. So we're getting it on the business side. We also are an industry that is looking to attract and retain new innovative talent from a broad and diverse set of groups. And so we also know that 70% of millennials have stated that they'll choose their employer based on that company's sustainability agenda. And 5 out of 5 of our financiers have shared with us that they expect robust sustainability and particular climate disclosure and expect us to be on track and aligned with international climate science. 5 out of 5 of our largest financial institutions. These are all different signals that we're getting that it's important for us to do the right thing, which is to say create a more sustainable ecosystem to help move 90% of all global commerce around the globe. Next slide, please. So we at Crowley Maritime have a moonshot level of ambition here. As a company, it's been our purpose for the past several decades to enrich lives through the delivery of innovative solutions, whether that's delivering really innovative solutions for the transportation of containerized cargo or on ship escort, tugs, and our other types of businesses. So when you marry that purpose of wanting to enrich lives through these innovative solutions done right with ESG, or environmental, social, and governance factors, we come up with this level of ambition that by 2025, we as a corporation pledge to be the most sustainable and innovative maritime and logistics solutions provider in the Americas, both North and South. We know that that's a really big ambition, and we have a lot of different irons in the fire to help us get there. Let's talk through some of those on the next slide. So, taking action on decarbonization. What are some of the things that we have just started to do over the past 10 days? This is the past 10 days worth of sustainability work here at Crowley encapsulated. We've started to look at our existing fleet on that top left photo that you see, our existing fleet that operates on San Francisco Bay, down in the port of San Diego, LA Long Beach, Seattle Tacoma, and a number of other ports in the United States, and say, how can we lower the carbon impact associated with those operations today? How do we make that happen? And we're really happy to announce that we've started to pilot biofuels in a robust way across our value chain and our operations. But we're not just looking at our current fleet. We have to look at the fleet of tomorrow as well. And so to that end, just last week, we announced that we are going to be building the first ever electric tugboat in the United States. This tugboat will be operating in the port of San Diego. So happy to see the port of San Diego represented on this call as well. And it's a result of a really robust public and private partnership that enables us to bring this asset to life that's going to be saving over 26 tons of CO2 per year, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a huge step. In addition to us working on decarbonizing our own operations, we are a full service maritime company that also touches a lot of different pieces of the energy value chain. And so to that effect, we're also working on decarbonizing the grid or enabling the energy transition in a variety of different geographies. In Puerto Rico, we're standing up a robust virtual LNG pipeline and are happy to announce that we're actively sourcing renewable or biogas to help drive down the carbon intensity away from coal and diesel fuel that was previously used to generate electricity on the island in a way that has removed 286 million pounds of carbon from the atmosphere since we started that operation just a few years ago. And one of the most exciting things that we're happy to announce today is that we're working actively as a turnkey solutions provider for the offshore wind industry. So happy to hear our colleague from the state of Maine talk a little bit about what they're up to up there. But we've announced a number of different partnerships to help bring that Biden ambition of a clean grid by 2030 to life through the blue economy. Next slide, please. Sustainability at Crowley for us is more, though, than just environment. It's more than just ensuring that we reduce our climate impacts to zero in line with science. It's also about ensuring that we have a diverse constellation of employees, that we're good stewards in our community, and that we're operating with the utmost degree of integrity and ethics. So we have a really robust program. It's a new thing for our industry in the United States to focus on, and we're really happy to be partnering with organizations like the Center for the Blue Economy. Thank you very much and appreciate the time and look forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nico. And Dr. Graham, you are up next.
Excellent. Thanks. It's great to be talking to everyone today. As Jason introduced, I'm well entrenched in the aquaculture industry, both academically and commercially. I'm a professor here at Moss Lane Marine Labs, where we've been doing lots of work on aquaculture. And I don't think it's lost on anyone that there has been a massive expansion of the aquaculture industry regionally, but also globally to really impact the way people eat food. And, you know, there's lots of climate consequences to this expansion, and some are positive and some are negative. And for those of you who've recently seen the Netflix show Seaspiracy, I think that's brought, you know, a lot of attention to some of those issues recently. And there's been a movement for a while now to try to look at what can be done to enhance those positive impacts of the aquaculture expansion at the expense of the negatives, right? Can we start to turn the needle so that, you know, aquacultural expansion commercially really does start to have net positive benefits, you know, for the planet's ecosystems and the planet in general. And this is when you start to discuss things like sustainable aquaculture and responsible aquaculture and restorative aquaculture, very similar to what we've talked about on land with like regenerative agriculture. This is a huge discussion. There's people way smarter than me that know a lot more and are much more articulate to be able to talk to the masses. And it's probably not really a discussion, you know, that we want to have like today, you know, to really get at the pointed issue. I think the reality is there is a push for aquaculture expansion to really be a moving force in the blue economy, right? The idea here is to make money feeding people. That's why companies are in the business. They must be able to make money. Making money, does it have to come at the expense of the climate? Can making money feeding people actually benefit the climate in any such way. And I think that's what people are starting to focus on now. So I really don't want to talk about what sustainability is or what all the major critical issues are. What I'd really like to talk about is the big push recently to move forward seaweed and shellfish aquaculture as two potential vehicles for change that could have definitely positive, much more positive than negative impacts on the climate. And that's really where my focus is. And so I think what I want to do today is just by looking at the potential for expanding seaweed and shellfish aquaculture, how might it fuel, you know, the blue economy in ways that could be good for the planet. And I want to get to what I call healthy hype. There's a lot of hype right now in seaweeds. There's lots of interest globally because everyone knows that seaweeds suck up carbon and suck up nitrogen while they do their thing. And it's such a cool idea to think about the potential positives just simple seaweed farming can have on the way we eat, but also on the way the environment responds to how we grow our food. But we need to be healthy in this hype. We need to understand words like sequestration and what they really mean and when to use them. I think most of us would understand that if you bring carbon into a seaweed by its natural growth, you can grow seaweed anywhere in basically in any body of water, fresh water, salt water, that has the natural resources that seaweeds need, which is carbon, nitrogen, various elements, and light. If you grow it in any one of those waters, it will absorb some of these things that we consider to be problematic, right? An excess of carbon, you know, in the global atmosphere and in global waters. And so in doing so, it helps theoretically solve part of our problems. The issue I have with the word sequestration, though, is if you really want to lock that carbon away so that it is no longer part of the carbon cycle at timescales that are important to us, you actually have to lock it away. You can't then feed that same seaweed to an animal because the process of metabolizing that seaweed to grow the animal, say an abalone, highly sustainable, you've now released that carbon back in the environment. It is not sequestered. So we really need to get an understanding of what we're talking about here. When we talk about seaweeds and shellfish, we're really talking about recycling. How do you best use the resources available in the environment to package food in ways that doesn't exacerbate the problem, right? And I think that's what I want to talk about. So if Rachel, if you can pull up the one slide I have, you know, what we really focus on here is looking at seaweed or shellfish aquaculture as ways to enhance our food production systems that takes pressure off of maybe less sustainable, more problematic ways of growing food. And I'm not going to pick on any one industry, but just show you an example at a really large scale, how you can benefit through seaweed production and adding it to you know, the way we currently produce food that has net positive benefits. So this is a cartoon of a very large project we've been trying to do here at Monterey Bay. And what this is looking at an industrial setting, right? So here in the middle of the slide, you can see a power plant. If you're familiar with Monterey Bay, we've got a giant power plant here at Moss Lane Marine Labs. And next to that power plant, we have a very large industrial facility that has some tanks that are available to pump in seawater from the Monterey Bay, right? So this is kind of like a land-based system, which is, like I said, it's very industrialized. We're here at the mouth of Monterey Bay, which is at the end of the Salinas River, which is a part of the large Salinas Valley, which is a huge agricultural region, whether it be ranching or farmland. And so there's an opportunity, for example, in this situation, to grow seaweed in very large, you know, 5 million gallon tanks. This is a huge facility that would allow you to, like I said, grow seaweed. You would be growing seaweed on water that is heavily impacted by agriculture. So it's got lots of nutrients. Some would call it eutrophied. And you would be able to suck up carbon as you grow those seaweeds. So in the process of growing the seaweed, you'll be able to you know, use that agricultural runoff to uptake nutrients and carbon dioxide. That seaweed biomass, while absorbing those nutrients and carbon dioxide, could then be used to fuel a variety of products, right? This could be protein extraction for humans. It can go into biofuel, it can go into fertilizer, or as you might be aware now, it could possibly be used to feed livestock, which would have a secondary effect by potentially reducing methane in the global atmosphere by decreasing or disrupting methane production in the burping of the cows. In addition to that, the material can be used to create cleaner water by processing that carbon and that nitrogen and removing it from the agricultural runoff. You're bioremediating those waters that makes the area available to bring in oyster farming, other shellfish farming, or additional offshore habitats, coastal restoration in estuarine environments. So here you have a singularly simple thing. Growing seaweed on land is able to, through the process of what it does physiologically, clean the water, potentially clean the air, potentially become a product that can go to humans, to biofuels, to fertilizers, to ag, to animals, to global atmospheric methane. It's a really nice story. And I think what we're seeing now is those are the types of stories people are starting to consider, these add-on values, this aquaculture expansion. How can we add shellfish? How can we add seaweed to make these processes more positive than they are negative? And what we're seeing is that there's economic value in all of these trickle-down effects. And so what I would love to see, and I think is happening in the next few years and decades, is how do we start to quantify those tangible carbon and nitrogen and ecosystem benefits in a way that we can focus corporations on this commercially. So that's kind of where I wanted to leave it, hoping we have a lot to talk about later.
Thank you so much, Dr. Graham. Okay, and now we have Alyssa Mann is up next. So I'll get you going here. Okay.
There we go. Gotta find my unmute button. Can you see my slides okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Alyssa Mann. I'm the Coastal Project Director for the Nature Conservancy here in California. I'm calling in today from where I live in Pasadena. And I would like to quickly acknowledge that I'm on traditional and ancestral land of the Tongva and Tatavian people who were the original caretakers of the LA Basin. And to acknowledge, especially working for an organization that owns and manages land for conservation, but that has come at a dire cost to Indigenous people, and to express my commitment to supporting the original and current stewards of our natural systems in any way that I can. I'm so pleased to be a part of today's celebration of 10 years of the Center for the Blue Economy, and our discussion today about how the ocean and our coast can help solve the climate crisis. CBE and the Nature Conservancy have been close partners for years on advancing our understanding of how nature-based solutions can help enhance the resilience of our communities, economies, and ecosystems to the big challenge in front of all of us, which is climate change. First, this is a problem for people. Rising sea levels have already begun to creep up California shores, bringing with them a whole host of problems for local communities. By 2050, 600,000 Californians will be impacted by coastal flooding and sea level rise, and $150 billion in properties at risk. And this doesn't take into account California's significant coastal tourism industry, which is valued around $44 billion a year. So due to the many aspects of this challenge, coastal communities across the state are actively developing community adaptation plans and developing strategies for resilience. The resilience of nature and how nature also provides resilience to communities needs to be considered in these adaptation planning efforts. Nature and nature-based solutions will be important contributors to ensure a more resilient future and also help us meet our climate goals for reducing carbon emissions. California's coastline is a pretty amazing place. 3,500 miles of outer Pacific coast and inner bay. The coast is home to the highest levels of native species richness in a state that's already the most biodiverse of the continental US states. From the rocky intertidal and iconic beaches of our outer coast to the marshes and mudflats that dominate our estuaries, our coastal habitats support amazing biodiversity, some of which isn't found anywhere else in the world. I know for me personally, growing up on the coast has influenced my life in small and profound ways. And this isn't unusual for Californians. Nearly 90% say that coast is personally important to them. But climate change-driven sea level rise is threatening our coastal habitats. With 5 feet of sea level rise, nearly 60% of coastal habitats are highly vulnerable to loss. And this has cascading impacts, threatening imperiled species and threatening California's investment in coastal conservation. Nature is a critical part of the solution for long-term resilience. Our science shows us that it is possible to mitigate the losses we're anticipating from sea level rise to achieve no net loss of coastal habitat, which in turn provides multiple benefits by reducing risk to people, enhancing quality of life, habitat for species, and carbon sequestration. These are just a couple examples here in California. First, on the left, a collaboration between local government, state government, NGOs, and the military to ensure a resilient network of over 9 miles of coastal wetlands from Ormond Beach to Point Mugu in Ventura County. These habitats provide important flood protection for the communities of Oxnard and Port Hueneme, and the naval base of Ventura County, a critical asset, military asset, and the largest employer in the county. And then here in Monterey, where CBE is, where TNC and CBE worked with transportation planners to develop nature-based adaptation approaches to sea level rise that would provide benefits to the transportation infrastructure and the amazing habitat of the state's 7th largest estuary, Elkhorn Slough. So demonstrating these kind of multi-benefit solutions and collaborations on the ground and then scaling them across the US and beyond, this is how we ensure a more resilient future. And our joint research is telling us that this is the decade that we must make big progress. But with that, I'll turn it over and look forward to the conversation. Thanks. Please stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. And now we have Dr. Dagher. Are you with us? Let's see. Dr. Habib Dagher, the University of Maine.
Good afternoon.
Ah, there, great. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Can you see my screen at all?
Yes, you can see it.
All right. Great to be here today. Go back to my friend Charlie Cogan, who used to be in Maine, and Charlie asked me to talk about what we're doing in Maine regarding climate change. And so I'll tell you about our biggest program is in the state of Maine. I work at the University of Maine. I'm director of the Composites Center, and I've been working on floating wind turbine technologies for about 13 years. And what is a floating turbine?
Dr. Dagher, can I interrupt you just briefly? Yeah. Your screen is being shared kind of in the view that you see it there rather than in a slideshow type of presentation.
Let's try one more time.
Yeah.
This better?
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. So I'll be talking about floating technologies and what are floating wind turbine technology, why are they important, and what can they do? A floating turbine is a turbine that floats, that's held up by a floating hull, just like imagine a boat holding up a wind turbine. But in this case, this is called a semi-submersible hull. Actually, the technology was developed in the oil and gas industry for oil and gas rigs. And we're working for ways to convert these technologies to hold up floating wind turbines, because there's so much offshore wind capacity off the US coasts. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. This particular turbine, just to give you a sense of scale, is really big. If you look, this is the school bus where my cursor is. Okay, so this is not tiny. This particular turbine that we would like to put off the coast of Maine in 2 years is an 11 megawatt turbine. This single turbine is good enough for about 5,000 US homes in terms of electricity needs. The turbine is manufactured dockside and towed out to sea with tugboats and moored to the seabed. What you see here is mooring lines, 3 mooring lines from each corner of the turbine, and an undersea cable that comes down from the turbine and makes a lazy wave and back to the seabed. The cable has buoyancy modules on it so that as the turbine moves around a little bit, the cable can follow it. These turbines can be placed beyond the horizon where the winds are the best. Typically, the farther you are from shore, the better the winds are. This is what the offshore wind potential looks like off the US coast. Darker means better winds. On the West Coast, Northern California has very dark areas here with extremely good winds. And when you go down towards the LA area, there's another good area right around here where you have good winds. Unfortunately, closer to the coast in California, the wind isn't very good in Southern California because the winds come in from north to the south, and they're basically shielded by going over land before they get to sea. But if you look at on the east coast of the United States, as you go north, the wind gets to be better and better and better. And when you get down to the Gulf of Maine, where the state of Maine is, we have the best winds on the east coast of the United States. And to give you a sense of how much wind we have, we estimated 12 years ago that if we only harnessed 3% of the Gulf of Maine wind area, we can electrify all heating and all transportation in the state of Maine. So we can go all to electric cars and electric heat pumps to heat the states. And that's important to us because Maine is the most heavily reliant state on heating oil, and we put a lot of CO2 in the air. So our governor, Governor Mills, put an ambition plan last year to go to be carbon neutral in the state of Maine by 2045. And offshore wind will be an important part of getting there. Now, around the United States, there's a lot of offshore wind as well, including California. California has one of the largest resources in offshore wind in the country as well. But around the US, there's about 2,000 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity, almost 7,200 terawatt hours per year. That means that's about twice the US electricity use. So that we can power the United States twice with the offshore wind resource. And as you know, close to 70 to 80% of the US population lives in coastal states. So what a great opportunity for us to use that resource, not only to create jobs, but to help green our electricity system. That's President Biden just a couple of weeks ago announced a goal of 30 gigawatts of offshore wind on the East Coast by 2030. It's a wonderful goal. And states have actually made commitments within each state on the East Coast for offshore wind capacity. You could see here in Massachusetts at 5,600 megawatts, Rhode Island, and so on and so forth. So there's a commitment from the states on the East Coast for 31,000 megawatts of offshore wind capacity already. If that gets built by 2030, that means a lot of jobs. We're looking at about $100 billion investment on the East Coast, Northeast Coast to the Mid-Atlantic states, 44,000 jobs by 2030, and the ability to provide energy for 10 million homes. That's an example of what's going on in our neighborhood in the Northeast United States. How do you float a wind turbine? Well, there's 3 different technologies, ironically borrowed from the oil and gas industry. So oil and gas rig technology turned into floating wind turbine technology. The 3 technologies are called the spar buoy, a semi-submersible, and a tension leg platform. The technology we're using is called the semi-submersible. And it's almost like if you've been on a catamaran is a boat that has 2 hulls, right? And as you make the hull bigger, you can make the catamaran more stable. And as you put the hulls farther apart, you can make the catamaran even more stable. So this is not a catamaran, it's a trimaran. It's got 1, 2, and 3 hulls. And these hulls are essentially made out of steel or concrete and filled with air. So essentially the big air tanks. And the column, the tower is supported in the center of the floating turbine. The good news is the cost of offshore wind and land-based wind is going down significantly. So there's no excuse to say anymore that clean energy actually costs more. Actually, clean energy is going to cost less than fossil fuel-based energy. To give you a sense of scale, this report was actually published from California, from the Berkeley labs this month. And it showed that onshore wind costs are going to continue to reduce dramatically to close to 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Fixed bottom offshore wind will continue to come down to less than 5 cents a kilowatt hour. And floating offshore wind, which is what we're working on, will get down about 6 cents or less per kilowatt hour. And by all measures, if you can compare that to the cost of electricity in California or Maine, that's a good deal. Okay, and the technology is getting less expensive because we're scaling up the turbines and building bigger farms. So we're industrializing how we produce them. We have the goal is to build 4 factories of floating turbines. And this is in our lab at the University of Maine, where we're testing 165-foot blade, for example, to make sure it's going to last 20 years in its environment. Some of the other technologies that we've deployed at UMaine, and we built actually an ocean simulator to test offshore wind technologies. This is actually a wave basin with a wind tunnel over it. There are wave basins across the country. There are wind tunnels, but nobody's put the two together yet. So we can create windstorms over wave storms to test floating wind technologies and optimize them and drive their costs down. This is an example. I'm going to show you an example here of a floating turbine at 150 scale. That's a 150 scale version of a large turbine in a 50-year storm, both wind and wave storm. That gives you an example of how we're testing these technologies to help drive their costs down and deploy them. And finally, back in 2013, we deployed the first grid-connected offshore wind turbine off the US coast. It was deployed off the coast of Maine. It's a 1:8 scale version of a full-scale unit. It was designed at the University of Maine, built at the University of Maine, shipped on 3 trucks down to Brewer, Maine, and towed down the Penobscot River for 10 hours, and moored off the coast of Maine, in Castine, Maine, for 1.5 years to test the technology. And it showed us that it actually works. And we can, in a 500-year storm, which is a 70-foot wave in the Gulf of Maine, it moves off vertical less than 7 degrees. Okay. And here's an example of one storm that we saw in December 2013. This is called Winter Storm Electra. It was a named storm off the coast of Maine. That's our floating turbine. And you can see here what's blown across is not clouds. That's actually snowstorm. It's snow blown across. And you can see the white caps and the size of the waves relative to the size of the hull. Even though it's a floating hull, you don't even see it move. Okay, and that's the kind of technology we've been able to develop. And the next phase of our program is to build the full-size unit. This is a 1:8 scale unit. The full-size unit would be bigger than the Washington Monument. It will float over 14 miles off the coast of Maine. And the goal is to start construction next year and have it up and running the end of 23, beginning of 24. It's a pleasure to be on the panel.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Dagher. That is stunning. That's amazing. Just mind-blowing that I could operate that well in those conditions. Wow. So our next speaker is Jason Giffen with the Port of San Diego. And I will find you here, Dr. Giffen, put a spotlight on you.
Thanks so much, Rachel. I really appreciate the time. And I have to just say, kudos to CBE 10-year anniversary. Kudos to the professors, the staff, and all the students for really leaving a footprint. And that footprint keeps getting bigger and bigger. And I have to just also say it's quite a privilege. And you can go ahead and key up the slides when you get a chance there, Rachel, to be on this panel and kind of clean up all of the innovation that has been presented so far. I'm going to focus a little bit on some of those partnerships that the port has. And I'm very proud to say, whether it be with the Nature Conservancy and Alyssa, or working closely with Nico and Crowley Tug, or with our friends up in Moss Landing, through some of our partners at the Port of San Diego. I know Leslie Boer is online, and she's with one of the companies we've partnered with, which is called Sunken Seaweed. So I just want to give a shout out to all those partners, and it's so good to be here today. So if we just go to the next slide, I'm just going to give a little bit of brief context in terms of who we are. The Port of San Diego is nestled into the southwest corner of California, and we manage a little over 14,000 acres of submerged lands and tidelands, as shown on this map. And our biggest partner actually around the bay is the US Navy. If you go to the next slide. Everybody's very familiar with what ports do. We move cargo and people. But in addition to moving cargo and people, this slide just gives you a thumbnail sketch of some of the other assets and amenities that we have around San Diego Bay, whether it be our public fishing piers, museums and attractions like the Midway, 18 hotels, numerous parks from North Bay to South Bay, a tremendous amount of artworks, restaurants, and recreational opportunities. And of course, if anyone's come to San Diego and has come down to San Diego Bay, there's always a lot of fun things to do on the waterfront. But what I want to really focus on talking about is how we're partnering and being a catalyst, as ports can be catalysts moving forward a lot of these sustainability initiatives, given our extremely broad portfolio that we're responsible for, whether it be navigation, commerce, fisheries, recreation, or environmental stewardship. So if you go to the next slide, I'm just going to walk you through kind of three legs of the stool in terms of how ports, and specifically the Port of San Diego, is looking at what we can do to lead and do our part to harness the blue economy to really solve and focus on climate issues. The first item that we're really spending a lot of time and resources on is what can we do to advance clean, modern, and sustainable port operations. You saw a snapshot of that when Nico was speaking about Crowley Tug and talking about advancements in vessels. But in addition to vessels, it's also expanding that infrastructure. So when ships are at berth, they do not have to focus on using their diesel engine, but they can plug into the grid. We're also looking at electrifying and partnering with truck companies that either are involved with short haul trucks and transitioning those from diesel to electric, or really looking at how we can advance and support technology ultimately for long haul trucks. So that's on the infrastructure side of things and really focusing on reducing emissions. On the other side of the equation, if you go to the next slide, Rachel, we're also looking at what can we do to really advance nature-based solutions. And in that opening slide I showed you with the map, we have an extensive coverage of, like I said, almost 14,000 acres. And in and amongst that, we have a range of ecological environments, whether it be the traditional armored shoreline that many people are used to seeing in and around a port, but we also have thousands of acres of wetlands and seagrass that we're looking to not only protect, but we're looking to expand and enhance. That picture in the lower right-hand corner is an old salt pond that had been pretty much in production through the early part of the 20th century. Well, we've been partnering and we just got approval to actually turn that old salt pond into a mitigation bank. So we're in the process of getting all our entitlements lined up so we can actually turn that into a functional wetland, as opposed to what you see there, which is pretty much a denuded salt marsh. Some other things that we are looking at advancing through an innovative idea, which is called our Blue Economy Incubator, where we partner with startup or more mature companies to test different types of products and services in and around San Diego Bay. The photograph shown there in the middle is a partnership we have with a company called Ecology, which has a bioactive cement mix that creates tide pools that actually attracts marine life as opposed to repelling it. So these are some ideas that we're looking at doing in terms of exploring nature-based solutions to not only benefit the biological environment, but also to sequester carbon, as Dr. Graham was speaking about. Some other things that we're doing in San Diego Bay is focusing and supporting on aquaculture, specifically partnering with sunken seaweed. And I know I mentioned that in the introduction, but that's an example where we're really looking at how we could grow and harness sea lettuce, but at the same time look at the remediation potential for seaweeds. So lots going on the nature-based side of things. If you just go to the next slide, please. What we're doing at the Port of San Diego is looking at it from a holistic and integrated approach. And this just gives you an example. It's not just one pilot, but we're really looking at a complement of plans, whether it be related to sea level rise, ocean planning, integrated natural resource management, or our fundamental port master plan, and really institutionalizing goals and policies that are holistic and integrated and support the economy. And if you just go to the final slide, one of our commissioners, Commissioner Benelli, had a motto when he was the chair of our board, which is to think globally, plan regionally, and act locally. And what this slide really encompasses and what the Port of San Diego is focusing on doing. At the top, taking cues from the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, and then following that down with all our partnerships throughout California, many of which represented by people on this panel, down to the local level. We really feel like it's going to take all of us working together to harness the power of the blue economy to solve and address climate change. And we're just very happy to be at the table and also in the field deploying solutions. Thank you very much. That concludes my remarks.
That is great. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Charles Colgan, and I'll put a spotlight on all of you, our panelists, as well as we move into the discussion period. So welcome, Charlie.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to everyone for coming. I'm happy to be here from CBE East, which is in South Portland, Maine, where I've been living in COVID world. As many of you know, my home has been in Maine, and I'm bi-coastal these days. I have a question for each of you, largely to get things started. You know, you go through a series of presentations like this, and you're just kind of overwhelmed with all of the information you got and all the information you feel you still need to get. So let me start with a couple of them, and I'm going to go through them in more or less the order of presentation, and start with Nico. You've clearly embarked on a lot of aggressive and innovative ideas. What do you see as kind of the major barriers or the major issues that you've got to get around in order to achieve the vision that you've laid out?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Colgan, for that question. I think that's a really important one. I'd say that there are two main barriers to our success here in achieving our goal of being, one of the most sustainable companies within a sustainable industry. And the first is cost. It really does come down to the money. As a private corporation, being able to invest in a lot of these solutions is something that really impacts the P&L, just to be candid. That electric tugboat, for example, that we referenced before, costs more than 2x the build of a conventional fossil fuel powered tug. And we wouldn't be able to do it without partnerships like we have with the Port of San Diego that's helping to underwrite the shoreside infrastructure, the utility companies, the state of California, and our federal partners as well. So cost is really a big one. The second, I think, biggest challenge for us is the heterogeneity of solutions that are out there, right? We're used to, as an industry, putting dead dinosaurs and plant matter into a tank, combusting it through a power plant, and moving our assets through the water. And that's something that really is just not going to be feasible in a future state for the shipping industry. We're going to have bespoke solutions depending on the specific application for the vessel or asset that we're talking about, whether that is battery electric in the case of this tugboat, whether that is biofuels that have life cycle carbon neutrality or even carbon negativity associated with them, or whether that's e-methanol, green ammonia, or green hydrogen. Those solutions and that heterogeneity of solutions then creates a feedback loop by which the cost is also driven up, because you need to develop co-located infrastructures in our ports that Mr. Giffen can probably speak to more cogently than I can. But that's a challenge that we definitely see, the cost and the fact that there's no one silver bullet to solve the shipping crisis in terms of emissions.
Yeah, so in a way, this is like the automobile industry was somewhere between 1900 and 1910, when it wasn't at all sure what technology was going to win out as the future. In fact, most people were betting on either steam or electricity. And that turned out to be neither of those.
That's exactly right. Or it could even be compared to the more recent debate between Blu-ray and HD DVD.
Yeah. Mike, a lot of the things that you mentioned are issues that we are together hopefully going to be working on in the near future. I want to raise an issue about aquaculture that is frequently raised in discussions around the world. So about 15 miles south of where I am here in South Portland is a company called Atlantic Sea Farms, which is in the business of growing kelp and selling kelp products. They've got both wholesale and retail kelp products that they're selling around the world. And their production comes from farmers who are former lobstermen, who are either out of the lobster business entirely or in the lobster business part-time now. And they're trying to diversify the work, provide a way for people to get out of capture fisheries that are particularly climate challenged and into more sustainable aquaculture operations. To what extent do you think that's part of the future of aquaculture? And is it likely that the vision that you see from world leaders around that aquaculture is going to eventually supplant capture fisheries, particularly from a labor point of view, is likely to happen?
I think it's a huge deal, Charlie. One of the problems here is, there really are some sustainable fisheries out there that do a really good job and are highly conscientious of what they're doing. And there's some tradespeople involved in that are really proud of the jobs that they've got going and the products they create. As we start to look at maybe some of the less sustainable activities and look at maybe adding sustainable aquaculture to that, you really do need to get into some retraining activities and asking, a person who spends their life on the shore and has been trained to do one activity are going to want to stay involved in the coastline. And so being able to offer educational training at K-12 to get their children involved in understanding the true value of sustainable activities, getting them involved in how to modify their lobster boat to be able to work as a tender on kelp farms, and to be able to create, for us, for example, where we're going to be most likely not looking at fishing going to aquaculture, but maybe ag going to aquaculture. How do you do that kind of retraining? I mean, you get people who spent years on ag farms who will then show up at a land-based system where it's all water and it's high tech. I mean, how can you really make a nice transition so that we still have value at the job level? Because what you don't want to do is I don't think you want to alienate, right? I think it causes trouble for all of us if sustainability and the moniker of sustainability starts to isolate people who are just trying to make a living. So I think we need to do a better job on that. And one of the best ways to do it is to really start to articulate the true value of the carbon and nitrogen activities that are going to be going on with aquaculture, and getting people to understand that from their own standpoint as to why that's important and why they might want to get retrained and look at it. California's got a very inadequate aquaculture workforce. We're the 8th largest or 5th largest economy on the planet, yet there's very few people here in California who could really help allow for an aquaculture expansion because of training. So I think we really need to focus on that, and I think it has to come at the grassroots level with K-12 and through universities, and then we've really got to have I think we've got to have our governments really start to understand that this is important.
Thanks. Just a note, feel free to put questions you have in the chat box. If we can't get them during the session today, we'll make sure to pass them on your behalf to the panelists, so that you do get a response one way or the other. Alyssa, you mentioned a couple of the projects that we together have been involved on, including the Highway 1 project in Elkhorn Slough. And you mentioned a lot of other projects that have been demonstration projects, proving that you can do this, proving that it makes sense, that natural infrastructure makes sense, that you can combine transportation projects with ecological restoration and have them make sense. What do we need to do to move from demonstration to operationalization to make this not just a set of demo projects that we get funded on a random basis whenever somebody has some money left over, to really operational work in the state and local agencies that have to make this happen one way or another?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie, for that question. That's a really good one. I know that from our work working in a number of different municipalities and different jurisdictions, certainly communities are saying that they need those demonstrations to be able to have the confidence and have sort of a proven method as they're embarking on identifying projects themselves. Certainly, there's scarce resources for adaptation, and some of these are really new things. And so having that is really important. But like you said, it's not enough for us to do a demonstration and then all of a sudden magically those happen all over the country or even all over the state. And part of that issue is certainly finding the funding and perhaps financing to help support some of these projects. We know that there's a pretty big funding gap out there for conservation work. And so that's something TNC is really striving towards with partners, whether that's identifying sources at the federal level. Certainly there's going to be a lot of investment in infrastructure coming up here pretty soon, and how important it is to extend that to natural infrastructure. And so, that's one thing that we drive towards. Certainly in the state of California too, we're looking at opportunities perhaps in the next, in the 2020 election to perhaps put another bond specifically focused on climate resilience. And how do we get some of those funding sources out the door? Because there are people ready to do it. Obviously, you heard from the port, and they're doing a lot of great things out there. So that's one challenge. And I think one of the other challenges is certainly, these are some of the organizations that we work with. Charlie, you mentioned our work with Caltrans in Alcorn Slough. We're definitely hearing really promising things from them, and they're really getting it and starting to do these projects. But they're really big organizations, and helping them to have both sort of the staff capacity and knowledge base, because it's to change essentially a big culture for how they've normally done business. And so, how important it is to work really closely across sectors to bring some of these new solutions to those agencies, and then give them, the actionable science that can help them make decisions.
Thanks. Habib, I see you have a nice picture of Dice's head and Castine behind you. I once spent a summer in a windmill just over your right shoulder, or your left shoulder, and that's another story. I wanted to ask, today's paper and today's Portland Press Herald, yesterday's Bangor Daily News had stories about the conflict between the wind operations and the fishing industry, notably the lobster industry. And today it was announced that Governor Mills is going to put a 10-year moratorium on offshore wind within the state waters, which are 3 nautical miles from the shoreline and don't really affect a lot of the projects that you're talking about doing. But this conflict over space clearly is going to be a dominant theme in the transition of how coastal ocean spaces are used. And I'm wondering how you're approaching the problem, and how can we keep it from becoming a major barrier to implementing what is clearly needed from the point of view of the overall energy system.
Thank you, Charlie. You've asked very, very important questions, and very fundamental question that not only are we faced with in the state of Maine, but also south of us in Massachusetts and the other New England states have faced very similar opposition, if you wish, including the West Coast as well. I've been in California giving talks about offshore wind, where there's been opposition from the fishing industry as well. It's an important question, and I think the important thing is really fostering dialogue between the cool heads on all sides, if you wish, to find solutions. Just to give you a sense, the impact in Maine, as I said earlier, we can electrify all of our heating and all of our transportation in the state of Maine, every car, with only harnessing 3% of the area within 50 miles of the coast of Maine, 3%. Okay, and if the question is, which 3% can we all agree on, is really what needs to happen. And as you know, the fishing density significantly reduces as you get farther and farther from the shore in the state of Maine, and that's why the governor did this. 75% of all lobster fisheries occur within the first 3 miles from the coast. So if we're going to put floating turbines 30 miles offshore, 25 miles offshore, they're going to have a lesser impact than if they were closer to shore, and that's why she did what she did. And so we certainly support what she has done to try to bring people to the table. That's what she's trying to do. And how to solve the problem is not simple. We've been working with the fishing industry, opening dialogue for the last almost 12 to 13 years. But we need more people on the policy side to bring people together and foster this dialogue and continue to have this dialogue. It's not going to go away. They're not. I tell you, in my opinion, there's so much misinformation out there right now that it's almost hard to control. And that's the big challenge that we have. There's a lot of misinformation.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Jason, just one last question for you. If everybody will hang on for just a sec. We're just a tad over. First, kudos for having the Sustainable Development Goal logos up there. Around the world, you see those all the time. In America, you hardly ever see them. So kudos for getting those up there. You know, a lot of the bigger ports, San Diego, LA, Long Beach, Oakland, are doing a lot of the same things you're doing. What are the prospects for doing this in the smaller ports? I mean, California has something like 17 or 18 active ports, most of which people have never heard of. I'm interested. I think the bigger ports, because of their volume, can handle a lot of this. What are the prospects for the smaller places?
Yeah, sure. So the market's going to follow in large part those larger ports as they continue to test technology and drive the prices down. The Port of San Diego, we're a mid-sized port for California. We're not like LA or Long Beach or Oakland. And what we're looking at, we're a mixed-use port, so we're a bit into the electrification side of things. But the other thing what I wanted to show was we're trying to blaze a different trail. We're a government agency, we're a landlord, we're a regulator, but we're also non-taxing. So everything that we do to keep our port running and operating is based on leases, whether they be public-public or public-private partnerships. So everything that we're looking at doing has a value proposition, and the model we're following, which we think is actually replicable and repeatable in other ports, is, well, if you look at the benefits to the community and the environment as well as the economic win, how can you move forward with a opportunity where the port can make some money, the investor or the tenant or the partner can also make some money, and demonstrate clearly that business and the environment are not mutually exclusive. For example, I touched on that example of the salt pond we call Pond 20. The value proposition there is it could have been redeveloped for a traditional urban use, but instead we looked at the value of mitigation land, being able to set that up, restore it, and then be able to sell the credits, so then the money from those proceeds could then be reinvested. And we have a policy that will go along with that. We'll reinvest back into further wetland expansion, but there's also an opportunity to, after we've paid off our liabilities and costs for constructing it, to reinvest into the local communities, which there's some that are disadvantaged. And so it's a way we're looking at in San Diego, how can we make the pie both bigger and for everybody? So there's also opportunities, not just for the port to thrive, but for the community, and especially in the environment in San Diego Bay, which is the reason the port is there in the first place, is because of that beautiful treasure that we manage.
Well, thanks. Everybody, you know, we raised a lot more questions than we answered here, but I think the panel also did a superb job of getting us thinking along a lot of really productive lines. There is a lot of innovation going on out there. There's a lot of really interesting work. And we just touched on the top of it. So please feel free to contact the panelists or us at CBE. I'll toss it back to Jason to wind things up.
Yeah, well, look, everybody, thanks so much. I'm really blown away. It's humbling to be, you know, in the company of so many innovative experts across really just such a broad range of technologies and environments and environments. So this is going to be our mission for the next 10 years, is to really focus on the blue economy solutions for the climate crisis, right? There's no more time to wait. The time is now, and that's what we're all about. So thank you all so much. You're, again, very inspirational, and have a great rest of your afternoon or evening, whatever time zone you're in. Take care, everybody.